Billionaire discovers a waitress sleeps in car with baby. 3 hours later, he buys her a house. What if the one person you've never asked for help was the one who could change your life forever? New York City was a beast. Its rhythm relentless, its pulse unforgiving. At L'Oil, a Michelin-starred restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, the air shimmered with opulence, crystal chandelas, casting golden light over linen tables where the city's elite savored dishes that cost more than most people's rent. Sarah Jenkins, 32, moved through this world like a shadow. Her tray balanced with practiced ease, her smile a carefully crafted mask. Her auburn hair was pinned into a neat bun, her green eyes bright with a warmth that hid the storm within. To the patrons, she was the perfect waitress, attentive, charming. Her faint southern drawl a nod to a childhood in Georgia she'd left behind at 17. But beneath the crisp, black uniform Sarah was barely holding together, her 1-year-old son, Miles, was her everything. With his chubby cheeks, green eyes, and a giggle that could melt stone, he was the reason she dragged herself out of bed each morning. Or rather out of the back seat of her 2005 Honda Civic, where they'd been living for 6 months. Her partner Ethan had walked out a year ago, leaving a note that read, "I'm not built for this," and a pile of bills that crushed her. The betrayal had carved a hollow in her chest, but the financial ruin was a slow suffocation. Rent, childcare, groceries. It all stacked up faster than her tips could cover. When she lost her apartment, she'd sold what little she owned, keeping only Miles's stuffed elephant and a photo of her late mother. Now their home was a car parked in a desolate lot on the city's outskirts, where the skyline glittered like a cruel promise. Tonight, Sarah's shift was a marathon. Her feet screamed in her worn-out flats. Her back ached from carrying heavy trays, and a dull headache pulsed behind her eyes. Miles was with a co-worker's teenage daughter, Lily, a makeshift babysitter Sarah paid with crumpled bills and "I owe us." The clock read 11:47 p.m. 1 more hour and she could pick him up, drive to the lot, and curl up with him under a pile of blankets. The November cold seeping through the car's cracked windows. She didn't let herself think about how unsustainable this was. Thinking led to despair, and despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. Across the city, Mark Delroy sat in his penthouse office 30 stories above the chaos. At 48, he was a self-made billionaire. His empire built on 6 high-end restaurants and a sprawling real estate portfolio. His sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes gave him an air of authority, softened only by the silver streaks in his dark hair. Mark was a man who controlled everything: schedules, deals, outcomes, but nothing filled the emptiness inside. His marriage had crumbled a decade ago under the weight of his ambition. His 2 daughters, now in their 20s, were distant, their calls rare and strained. Loneliness was his constant companion, one he buried under boardroom victories and late-night emails. Tonight, a strange unease gnawed at him. He just closed a deal for a new restaurant in Chicago. A triumph that should have energized him, but it felt hollow. On a whim, he decided to visit L'Oil. He told himself it was to check on operations, but deep down he craved the hum of human connection, even if it was just the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation. He slipped into his tailored coat and drove downtown, the city's pulse, a faint echo of his own restlessness. Mark arrived just before midnight, his presence sending a ripple through the staff. Waiters straightened, bussers moved faster, and the manager, Carla, a no-nonsense woman with a knack for efficiency, greeted him with a brisk nod. As he passed through the staff area, he overheard her talking to a busboy, her voice low but sharp. "Sarah's been off tonight. Carla said she's exhausted. Those late nights are catching up to her." Mark's ears pricked. He didn't. No, Sarah, not really. He vaguely recalled a waitress with a warm smile, but names and faces blurred in his world. What's going on with her? He asked, his tone casual but curious. Carla hesitated, her eyes flicking to him. Personal stuff. She's tough, though. She always pulls through. Mark nodded, but the words stuck with him. There was something in Carla's tone, a flicker of worry, a crack in her usual composure that unsettled him. He moved through the dining room, his eyes scanning the staff with a new intensity, though he didn't know why. The restaurant was winding down, the last patrons lingering over dessert and wine. Sarah cleared a table. Her movements mechanical, her mind a tangle of worries. She owed to $100 for childcare, her car's heater was sputtering, and Miles's cough was getting worse. She didn't notice Mark watching her from the bar, his gaze lingering as she tucked a stray hair behind her ear and forced a smile for a customer. To him, she was a paradoxed under pressure, yet carrying an invisible weight. At 100 a.m., Sarah, clock impacted, grabbed her coat, a thrift store find that smelled faintly of mothballs, and headed to the lot. Across the street, she picked up Miles from Lily's apartment, thanking the teenager with a strange smile and a promise to pay her soon. Miles was asleep, his tiny body bundled in a blanket, his car seat the only thing keeping him secure in their makeshift home. Sarah drove to the lot, a barren stretch of asphalt, framed by rusted chain-link fences and faded billboards advertising dreams she couldn't afford. She parked under a flickering streetlight, the only one that worked, and leaned back in her seat. The city's skyline sparkled in the distance, a world that felt a million miles away. She wrapped herself in a coat, her breath visible in the cold. She whispered to Miles, "We're okay. Baby, we're okay." Though the words tasted like ash, her pride kept her from asking for help. Her mother had taught her to stand tall, no matter what, but pride didn't keep the cold out. She closed her eyes, willing herself to rest, but sleep was a stranger. Mark, meanwhile, had stayed late, going over inventory with Carla. As he left, he glanced across the street and froze. There was Sarah sitting in her car, her head tilted back, eyes closed. A small shape was in the back seat, unmistakable even in the dim light. A child. Mark's chest tightened, his breath catching. The pieces clicked together. Carla's comment, Sarah's exhaustion. The car parked in this desolate lot. She wasn't resting. She was living here. The realization hit him like a wave. Mark knew hardship. He'd grown up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. His mother, Ellen, working 3 jobs, cleaning offices, waitressing, sewing, until her fingers bled. He'd watched her cry when she thought he was asleep. Her strength, a quiet fire that shaped him. But that was another life buried under layers of wealth and power. Seeing Sarah so composed at work, yet so vulnerable, now cracked something open. In him, guilt, anger, a flicker of his own past, it churned inside him, refusing to be ignored. He didn't approach her. Instead, he got into his SUV and drove to his penthouse, his mind a storm. He poured a glass of scotch, but it sat untouched. As he paced, Sarah's image burned into his mind. He'd seen employees struggle before turnover was high in this industry. But this was different. Sarah wasn't just another worker. She was a mother, a fighter, someone who carried the weight of the world and still managed to smile. At 3 a.m., he called his assistant Rachel, a woman who thrived on his impossible demands. "I need everything you can find on Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice tight discreetly. Now Rachel delivered a file by 5 Zun. a.m. It was sparse but devastating. Sarah's employment records showed no emergency contacts, no family she'd been late on daycare payments, and a co-worker had seen her sleeping in her car for months. Miles always with her. Mark read it in silence, his jaw clenched. He didn't know Sarah, but he knew her story. It was his mother's story, rewritten in a new city. A new time by 6:00 a.m. Mark was on the phone with his real estate agent, Victor. A man who could move mountains with a single call. "Find me a house," Mark said, his voice steady but urgent. "Small, safe neighborhood, fully furnished, ready to move in. I need it by tonight. No budget constraints." Victor, unfazed, sent details by 8:00 a.m. for a 2-bedroom cottage in Atoria. Charming place with hardwood floors, a sunny kitchen with blue tiles, and a garden bursting with roses. It was perfect. A home where a child could grow, where a mother could breathe. Mark wired the payment without hesitation, his mind already racing to the next step. This wasn't just about a house. It was about giving Sarah a chance to rebuild, to dream again. But Mark wasn't impulsive. He called. Carla, asking subtle questions about Sarah's shifts, her reliability, her character. Carla's answers were glowing but laced with concern. "She's the best we've got," Carla said. "But she's stretched then. I don't know how she keeps going." Mark hung up his resolve, hardening. He didn't want to embarrass Sarah, didn't want her to feel like a charity case. He needed to handle this carefully, to honor her strength, not undermine it. Meanwhile, Sarah was at a diner near Leto Oil, nursing a coffee that tasted like regret. She dropped Miles off at a friend's, a rare moment to gather her thoughts. Her phone buzzed. "Carla, Sarah, can you come back to the restaurant? Mr. Delroy wants to talk." Sarah's stomach dropped. Had she messed up, forgotten an order? She couldn't lose this job. It was all she had. She drove back, her hands trembling on the wheel, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The restaurant was quiet, the morning light soft against the polished floors. Mark was waiting in the lobby, his tailored coat draped over a chair, his expression unreadable, but not cold. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. "Oh, I saw you last night in the parking lot. You and your son." Her face burned, shame flooding her. She opened her mouth to explain, to deflect, but Mark held up a hand, his eyes steady. "I'm not here to judge," he said. "I know what it's like to struggle. My mother, she was like you, stronger than anyone, and I know you're stronger than most people I've ever met. That's why I did something." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "I bought you a house. It's yours. No strings, but it's not charity. It's a chance for you and your son." Sarah stared, her mind blank. A house, it was absurd, impossible. Her first instinct was to say no, to cling to her pride. The only thing she had left. "I can't accept that," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't take handouts. I've always made my own way." "It's not a handout," Mark said, his tone firm but kind. "It's respect. You've been fighting a war most people can't imagine, and you're still standing. Let me help you keep standing." Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back. Pride screamed at her to walk away, to keep scraping by on her own terms. But then she thought of Miles's cold hands in the car, his cough, the future she wanted for him. A home, safety, a chance. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Okay." Mark handed her a folder with the address keys and paperwork. "It's an Atoria," he said. "You can move in today. Take the day off." Carla's already been told. Sarah clutched the folder, her hands shaking. She didn't know what to say, how to process this. All she could manage was a whispered thank you. The house was a dream made real, nestled on a quiet street in Atoria. It had warm, hardwood floors, a kitchen with blue tiles that caught the morning light, and a garden bursting with roses and lavender. Sarah walked through it, keys in hand, feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. Miles toddled across the living room, chasing a patch of sunlight, his stuffed elephant clutched in his tiny hands. Sarah sank to the floor, holding him close, tears falling freely now. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not just for herself, but for him. She spent the first week in a daze unpacking the few belongings she'd kept, marveling at the softness of the bedsheets, the warmth of the walls. The house came furnished, every detail thought out. A crib for Miles, a cozy armchair by the window, a fridge stocked with essentials. It was overwhelming, almost too much. Sarah's pride still prickled, whispering that she hadn't earned this, that it was too good to be true. But every time she looked at Miles giggling as he played with a wooden toy left in the nursery, she silenced that voice. A week later, Mark invited her to a cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glitz of lead oil. It was a small, unpretentious place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee over steaming mugs. He told her the truth. "I didn't grow up with money," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "My mom, Ellen, raised me and my sister alone in Brooklyn. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning, waitressing, sewing, until her hands bled. We were hungry more nights than not. I built all this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing his empire, "because I swore I'd never let anyone I cared about struggle like that again." Sarah listened, her coffee untouched. Mark wasn't the untouchable billionaire she'd imagined. He was a man shaped by pain, by sacrifice, by a mother who'd given everything. His gesture wasn't pity. It was a reckoning with his own past. A way to honor the woman who'd made him who he was. "I saw you, Sarah," he said. His eyes meeting hers, not just in the parking lot, but every day at work. "The way you keep going. The way you smile for your customers, for your son. You're like her." And I couldn't look away. Sarah's throat tightened. She'd spent so long hiding her struggle, convinced no one saw her, but Mark had. And he'd acted not out of obligation, but because he understood. Over the next few months, Mark became a quiet presence in her life. He didn't push, didn't demand gratitude. Instead, he offered practical help, connecting her with a financial advisor to manage her debts, recommending a daycare with sliding scale fees, helping her enroll in night classes for business management. Sarah, wary at first, began to trust him. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the way he spoke of his daughters Clara and Elise with a mix of pride and regret. They were in their 20s, living their own lives, but the distance between them weighted on him. Miles thrived in the house, his cough fading, his laughter filling the rooms. Sarah started to dream again, not just of survival, but of a future where she could own a small cafe, a place where people felt seen the way she'd always tried to make her customers feel. She spent evenings sketching ideas in a notebook, her handwriting messy but hopeful. The Sunflower Cafe, warm lights, fresh coffee, a place for everyone. But there was a twist Mark hadn't shared. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Miles playing with a toy truck, Mark handed her a folder. Inside was paperwork for a trust fund for Miles, set up to cover his education, his future. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel obligated." Mark said, his voice steady but soft. "This isn't about me. It's about him." Sarah's breath caught. The trust fund was staggering hundreds of thousands of dollars, a safety net she'd never imagined. But it came with a weight. She looked at Mark, seeing the boy who'd grown up hungry, the man who'd built a life to escape that pain. "Why us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why go this far?" "Because you remind me of her," he said, his eyes glistening. "My mom, she never gave up no matter how hard it got. And neither have you. I didn't have anyone to help her back then. But I can help you now." Sarah clutched the folder, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just the house, the trust fund. It was the belief in her, the recognition of her fight for the first time. She didn't feel alone. A year later, Sarah stood in the garden of her home, watching Miles chase a butterfly, his laughter mingling with the hum of summer. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the air. She'd invited Mark for dinner, not at La Oil, but at her home, a simple meal of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, with Miles making a mess in his high care. It was a far cry from the restaurant's elegance, but it felt like family. Sarah had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Her night classes were paying off. She was halfway through her business management degree. Her grades strong despite the late nights studying after Miles was asleep. She'd started a savings account for the Sunflower Cafe, her dream taking shape with every paycheck. She was still waitressing, but she carried herself differently, now taller, lighter. Her smile no longer a mask, but a reflection of hope. Mark had changed too. He'd started calling his daughters, more rebuilding bridges he'd thought were burned. Clara had visited him last month, and they'd spent hours talking, something they hadn't done in years. He smiled, laughed more, his days less hollow. Helping Sarah hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his . As they sat on the porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, Sarah handed Mark a small box. Inside was a photo of her and Miles in the garden, framed in which she'd painted herself. Tucked beside it was a note. "You gave us a home, but you also gave us a future. Thank you for seeing us." Mark read it, his throat tight. For the first time in years, he felt whole, not because of a deal or a profit, but because he'd made a difference. Sarah looked at him, her eyes bright with tears. "You didn't just change our lives," she said. "You showed me I could change them too. I'm going to open that cafe, Mark, and when I do, you're getting the first cup of coffee on the house." He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "I'll hold you to that." But Sarah wasn't done. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tiny sunflower, its petals bright against the metal. "This is for you," she said. "A reminder that you're part of this." Part of us, Mark took it, his fingers brushing hers, his eyes glistening. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded, the cane heavy in his hand. As the stars emerged, they sat in silence. Two people bound by shared scars and quiet hope. The house wasn't just a gift. It was a bridge between their pasts and their futures, a testament to the power of seeing someone in their darkest hour and choosing to act. Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be late nights, setbacks, moments of doubt, but she was ready. She'd fight for Miles, for herself, for the dreams she'd buried too long. And she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The city, with all its chaos and cruelty, had shown her its heart, and she was ready to meet it. In the distance. The skyline glowed. No longer a taunt, but a promise. Sarah smiled, her hand resting on Miles's head as he dozed against her. This was their beginning, their story, their legacy. And it was only the